As we begin talking about Women History Month, it's also important to talk about women in the business world also. Women are celebrated and honored every single day by the USA. We recognize the value that women entrepreneurs present to our great growing economy. Women entrepreneurs challenge the discrimination that women face in the labor force every day by driving innovation and technology and placing small business and global competitive playing field. To drive the powerful influence of women entrepreneurs even further, it is important to understand that 9.4 million firms in the United States are owned by women, employing nearly 7 million people and generating 1 trillion in sales. The job creation and positive impact on our nation economy created by women entrepreneurs makes it very clear that there is no room for discrimination of any kind, and women entrepreneurs are key to our nation's success. It goes to say, without saying, that it's very important to recognize women as great business person also in our nation. Good evening. Welcome to another special edition of the International Grapevine. This is your host, Wallingford Lee. Tonight on International Grapevine, we're going to have the opportunity to talk about March, Women History Month, why it's important, and the different celebration. It goes without saying that women are the civilization, the mother of civilization, no question about that. And we feel pleased to have our special guest, who's a young lady that we had the pleasure to work with before. And we're thrilled that she had the opportunity to accept our challenges or our invitation to come on International Grapevine one more time. We're talking about the Honorable Judge Karina Alomar, the New York Supreme Court 11th Judicial District, who has been kind to be our special guest to talk about Women Month and why it's important. Welcome to our show.
Thank you very much for having me here. It's a great pleasure to be with you today, as well as the rest of your audience, talking about such an important topic, Women's History Month.
It's not only sensitive and important, but women have been taken for granted for a long time, and I take every opportunity I can to talk about the importance of women. Without a woman, none of us would have been alive. That's for sure. And on top of that, the great achievement and the discrimination that women have gone through over the years to get to where they are. And while a lot of door has been knocked down, I think there's more to be done. Why is Women Month so important in the month of March, and why is it important to you?
So let's begin. Women's history is very important because although women represent half of the population, the sad reality is that for centuries, we have been treated as property. We have been deemed less valuable, less intelligent, and we have been unjustly held back from achieving full equality throughout much of human history. The fact is that although women have pioneered movements, we've championed social change, we have made invaluable contributions towards society, our contributions have often been overlooked. And many times our achievements have not been honored. And instead we've had to put forward our ideas through men. Come the saying that we have, for every great man is a great woman. Let's look at history. Everybody talks about Martin Luther King, but we don't really talk about his wife, Coretta King Scott, who was a champion in her own right, who worked side by side, and even after his death, continued his cause. And so when we look at Women's History Month, we realize the fact that although we have made a lot of contributions to society, only less than 1% of our contributions are recorded in history. And Women's History Month seeks to change that. Women's History Month started in 1909, and then after 1909, when we began, it was inspired by the Women's National Women's Day that was organized by the Socialist Party of America, and it was first observed in 1909 in New York City, where we honored the New York Garment Worker Strike, which was done by women. Thousands of women marched in Manhattan into Union Square demanding equal pay and safer working conditions. 2 years later, Women's Day had grown into a national observance that spread throughout Europe. In 1913, the permanent Women's Day was changed to March 8th, and it was officially commemorated by the United Nations in 1975, and it was officially recognized by the United Nations in 1987. And then in 1987, here in the United States, Congress finally declared March as Women's History Month because many, pivotal movements in women's history occurred in the month of March.
So it was
And
long overdue before it was recognized in March 8th. But you brought up a very important thing that I want to talk about. Why do you think for so many years, I'm not talking about now, for so many years, women was pushing the corner? What was your thought process why that was done? Obviously, it was discrimination and abuse of power by man. Why do you think that took place? And why it took so long to overcome some of those things?
well, it's been a power struggle throughout the years. Um, Unfortunately, there's been the idea that um, what's important is muscle strength, fighting power. So historically, it's been the men that go off to war. It's been the men that go and fight in war. So it's been the idea that if you're physically stronger, you're more valuable, often overlooking the other contributions that are needed in military, the strategic planning, the fact that women have been available to to raise the children, take care of the family. So unfortunately, with this idea of militarization of society, it has come to the idea that what's important is that physical strength, and let's set aside the other contributions that are done by other members of society.
I,
So, for
I would
example,
add to that saying that women were also very important. A lot of them went to war. A lot of them worked into factories back here in the United States, making arms and stuff like that. They did contribute a lot. Also, I want to back up one thing that you said, and I like that you talked about when you talked about Martin Luther King and his wife. There's an arrow worldwide saying, behind every great man, there's a great woman. No, it's wrong. Right next to that man is a great woman who has made a difference, who has pushed him, who has helped him, who has helped them to be creative. That's what I preach because that's the way it should be. We must give women the proper recognition that they deserve.
you're absolutely right. However, historically, we have not been there. So, historically, what would happen is that when women had ideas, the only way that they could push forward their ideas is if they had a willing husband, father, or brother that would push them aside, that would, sometimes push forward their ideas as the idea of the man. But you're absolutely right. Women should be side by side, because if women and men were side by side, then there's so much that humanity could achieve. Unfortunately, we are still not there yet. And something that can be seen by the wage gap here in the United States. In the United States, as of today, 2022, women still only earn 83 cents for every dollar that a man earns. In the state of New York, women only earn 86 cents for every dollar that a man earns. And according to the research, women will not achieve pay equality for at least another century, and that is provided that this reset that has happened with COVID doesn't affect us negatively, because what we've seen in the past 2 years since this pandemic started, that there has been a lot of women leaving the workforce to care for children, despite the fact that children need to be raised by both men and women. We still have a society that believes that the primary responsibility of a woman is to care for children. So what we saw during COVID is that most, with children doing remote learning, everybody having to stay at home, it was mostly the women who left their jobs to care for their families. So, we still have to see how that is going to affect women's rights in the long run.
I happen to agree with you in everything that you've said, especially when we talk about pay scale. You take, for instance, Wall Street. There are some powerful women working there, leaders that have made a lot of money for Wall Street and stuff like that. Despite that, most men make more money than some of these women, and some of these women is way above these guys. But yet said, but because they're a man, they make the biggest bonus and stuff like, which is ridiculous. As an ex-banker, I had the opportunity to report into two women that was extremely bright, very knowledgeable, and taught me a lot of things in the bank. So I always feel and will continue to push equality because I think it's extremely important to give them the recognition that they deserve, not only as a mother that goes home after work and take care of things at home and stuff like that, but we should give them the due process respect that are needed to them because they deserve it and they earned it. No question about it. Why do you
Yes,
think the celebration of women is that important?
because we need to recognize that women are 50% of the population, and we need to acknowledge that their work, their contributions towards society are just as important as the contributions that men have. We have to acknowledge that a woman's job is not limited to being wives and mothers. It is all, there is much that women can achieve, and in societies where we have granted women access to education, we have seen just how far women can go. If you look back 100 years ago, there wasn't women there. You did not see many women in the law. You did not see many women in medicine. You did not see many women in college. Yet now, in the United States, it is more likely that a woman will have a college degree than a man. So it's important to acknowledge that if women are given opportunities, they can achieve much more than just being a wife and a mother. And not to say that those aren't important roles. There's a very important roles, but let's also take into effect. Raising a child is not just a woman's obligation, it is the obligation of the mother and the father. And that's something that even today, we don't realize, we still have certain disparity. For instance, when a man is taking care of the children, we see that, a lot of people still call that as babysitting the kids. No, they're not babysitting. He is parenting. Those are his children.
And his obligation.
Absolutely. For instance, you see a dad coming home with McDonald's. Oh, what a great dad. He's bringing McDonald's. But you see a woman bringing McDonald's to the home. What's wrong with her? That's all she can do for her kids. She can't cook a meal.
Well,
We
it's part
still
of the due process. It's part of the due process and the lack of respect by some men that don't have the proper knowledge and respect to recognize the ability of women. And it's very wrong. In part of research that I did about for this program, I read a part where it says not until 1970 they begin to give them the proper recognition to women in the world, in the job. And they talked about that this great celebration that took place in March did not get the aura that it needed until about 1970 on up. Is that accurate?
That is very accurate. As I said, it was only officially commemorated by the United Nations in 1975, and it was recognized. International Women's Day was only recognized by the United Nations in 1977. So it was in 1977 when, in the mid 70s, when we started, really acknowledging how important it was to recognize what women did, and and the contributions we're making. It was only in the 1970s when Title IX was passed, which prohibited sex discrimination in all federally funded educational programs. Um, so yes, it's the 1970s where we started, acknowledging the need for the government to take action and start, changing the ideas that society had towards women.
As we continue talking about the importance of Women History Month here in International Grapevine with the Honorable Judge Karina Lamar, we'll be right back on International Grapevine talking about the importance of women and their creativity and how much they are advanced and they still need to have advanced some more. We'll be right back on International Grapevine.
Women's History Month is celebrated in March. During this month, we recognize and honor women who have accomplished important work involving women's rights and equality. Women's History Month is rooted in International Women's Day. The first International Women's Day was on March 8, 1911. In 1978, a school district in Northern California recognized and celebrated International Women's Day for an entire week. This trend caught on, and soon more and more schools were extending the day to a week, sometimes 2 weeks. In February 1980, President Jimmy Carter issued a presidential proclamation declaring the week of March 8, 1980, a Women's History Week. He stated, "From the first settlers who came to our shores, from the first American Indian families who befriended them, men and women have worked together to build this nation. Too often the women were unsung and sometimes their contributions went unnoticed. But the achievements, leadership, courage, strength, and love of the women who built America was as vital as that of the men whose names we know so well." The women celebrated during Women's History Month are women who accomplished much. We honor women like Marie Curie, who was a physicist and chemist. We honor women like Susan B. Anthony, who worked during the women's suffrage movement that allowed women to vote, and also women like Martha Griffiths, who was one of the first women to win a seat in Congress.
And again, this is Wallingford Lee, the host of the International Grapevine, talking about Women's Month, month of March, and importance. And we also talk about the various discrimination that women have gone through all the years and still continue to go through. It's important that they have advanced a lot and deservedly so, but there's much more needed to be done. Finally, we have a woman as vice president of the United States of America, which is a major achievement, but there's still more to be done. We would love to see one day a woman be the president of the United States of America, as long as she's qualified, and there are a lot of qualified women out there. We have as our special guest, of course, someone who is very professional, and also someone who have climbed a lot of ladder and have knocked on a lot of doors to get to where she is. We're talking about the Honorable Judge Karina Lamar, who has been kind enough to be our guest in this program. Karina, we talked about a lot of important things, and we know a lot of this discrimination that happens with women back then, and it's still going on. I think it's a little bit more advanced in Europe. I think it's a little bit more advanced in places like Africa. I think it's very much advanced in certain amount of Muslim countries. Do you agree?
That women's rights are advanced.
No, that they're not being recognized. They need to be recognized more.
Oh, there are definitely societies where women
Mhm.
have not been recognized. I mean, we look at certain societies now where women have to be completely covered because it is the idea that if they're not covered, they will arouse certain feelings in men, and men cannot control themselves unless unless they're fully covered. There, where women are not allowed to receive an education, where women are not allowed to learn to read, to write, to have property. We still have those societies. So I believe that certain, the United States and certain other countries have gone a long way. We still have a long way to go. But yes, we are far ahead than some other societies. Absolutely.
Now, I can remember reading a lot of books on how difficult it was for women to get the right to vote, how much they had to really, truly fight to get there. We know for a fact back in 2013, there was a huge march in Washington, D.C. by over 18,000 women. One of the major leader in that movement was a black lady by the name Ida Wells, who was very important, even though she might have been put a little bit in the background because of her color, not because she wasn't capable, but what a march it was. And those are the type of things that started bringing attention to the nation that they had to deal and respect women. How far it went back before woman was able to vote, as far as you know?
I believe it was 1917 in the United States. And it was a fight where women went to jail. Women then started a hunger strike in jail. And then they were forcibly, some of them were forcibly fed. And it took many women having to go to jail so that we would earn this right to vote and to have a voice in our government. So when we look at Women's History Month, we've only had the right to vote for 100 years. Yet, this nation is a lot older than 100 years. So yes, there's a lot. We still have a lot more to do to gain equality in all sectors, in voting, in education, in society in general.
When you was much younger, did you encounter any barriers in terms of
I
career
encountered
movement?
many barriers. The barriers began at an early age. I remember being in high school and telling my counselor what my plan was for life, what my goals were. And, I was very fortunate because from an early age, I knew what I wanted to do. So I remember being in high school and saying to my counselor, I need these classes because I need to go to college because I want to be a lawyer. And my counselor said, well, you mean a secretary for a lawyer? And I
Wow.
said, no, I want to be a lawyer. And she goes, well, you know what? I think you're setting your goals too high. Maybe instead of a secretary for a lawyer, you can be a paralegal. But
Wow.
you know,
Wow.
and and I have to say that I was more fortunate than other women because in my house although I had a mother who also had the idea of, well, yeah, being a lawyer, you're looking for too much. You need to just go to college to get the MRS degree, find a nice husband. I had a strong father, and my father grew up. He basically was an orphan. His mother died when he was 4. His father was extremely abusive, and he was homeless as a child. So my father always said, he goes, I do not want you having to depend on a man. I want you to study. If you want to be a lawyer, I'm going to support you because I want you to be strong enough and financially independent that if you end up in a bad marriage, you don't have to hesitate like my mother did, and you can say, goodbye, good riddance. I can take care of myself. So I was very fortunate that I had my father who really, who would go to the school. He would fight for me so that I could be placed in the appropriate classes that I qualified for, and he always, motivated me to go to school and study. But, even once I became a lawyer, it was still difficult. As a young lawyer, I remember when I did arraignments, and I would go to the precinct to represent a client, turn a client in, or even when I went to court, there were many times where I was confused for the interpreter, or
Wow.
sometimes I was told to go take a seat, to stop sitting in the front seat because that was reserved for the attorneys. Now, there I am. I'm wearing my suit. Have my briefcase, but I'm not considered by the clerks or the court officers to be an attorney. I must be either the secretary for the lawyer, a client, or the interpreter. There are
Amazing.
many instances where I was called little girl. Many instances
Wow.
where things that if they were done today in the beginning of my career, today people would lose their jobs over because they were considered sexual harassment. But when I would, when I would go and talk about it, I was told, be quiet, don't say anything, because at the end of the day, the one who's going to get blacklisted is you, not them.
That's why I
So
started the program talking about a lot of barriers that you had to knock down to get to where you are. And one of those barriers had to do with having a solid, strong father who pushed you, who told you you could do it, you can do it, and go forward. And also, you to have the strength and intestinal fortitude after talking to your teacher, and she suggesting that maybe you should be a secretary and stuff like that. It tells me that you knew what you wanted. It tells me that you didn't look backward. You went forward to get to where you were going, and you certainly knocked quite the doors down to get to where you are today. No question about it.
yes, and I did, and I have, and I was fortunate. I had a very, strong father, and I was very fortunate. You know, not every young lady has it. But I think it's important, even if they don't have a strong father, they have somebody strong backing them, whether it's a strong mother, a strong teacher, a strong aunt, somebody who can motivate them to tell them, yes, you can. Don't listen to the negative people. Listen to the positive people. If you believe you can do something, you can do it.
Is diversity important in the workplace today?
Absolutely. It's important to see different perspectives. Um, you will see things through your viewpoint based on the experiences that you've had. And if we are limited to only one set of experiences, we're not going to be able to really be, I believe, fair in our judgments. I'll give you an example. I'm half Puerto Rican, half Ecuadorian. I believe you're Dominican. I believe that in our Latino cultures, there's certain things that are done that are not necessarily done in the United States. So, for instance, you come to a courthouse and you have somebody who's complaining about having paid money for a contract. If you have somebody that grew up in with the understanding that you only give money when there's a written contract, and you give that money to a lawyer, they're not necessarily going to believe somebody from, let's say, our culture, where oftentimes contracts are done through a handshake. So you need people who have different viewpoints, different experiences, so that you can be more understanding and achieve a fairer result.
As we continue talking about this, what are some of the contributions by women in the business industry as far as you're concerned?
As far as the business industry, I think one of the contributions that we've seen is that we have seen that women have been pushing forward with the idea about a more flexible plan in the workforce. So we've seen that when women are offered the flexibility for a more work-life balance, that their ability to produce is intensified. So I think that's one of the contributions that we've seen in the business workforce. We've seen different ideas, even in marketing. What you have sometimes with marketing is you have, if you're only dealing with men, they're marketing maybe products for women based on what they believe. And when you have a woman and they come in and they give their perspective, you will have a better plan. So there's many areas in the business, whether it comes to marketing, whether it comes to work-life balance, equal pay. These are all contributions that women make towards the workforce.
It's always important to talk about. I want to talk about a lot of discrimination that happened to women in the business world and overall. One of two of the people that went through a lot of discrimination in more ways than one are the Native Americans and, of course, Black women who fought so much for to get out of slavery and how much they fought for the civil rights movement. What are your feelings or thought process about those issues?
Well, as a judge, it's my belief that everybody deserves to be treated fairly, and we need to have our laws so that everybody is granted a seat at the table. Um, I it's, as I said, there are many barriers that still exist towards achieving full equality, not just for women, but for other sectors in society. And it is my hope that through the learning of history, through seeing how what we've done right, what we've done wrong, so that through having diversity, that eventually we will achieve proper equity worldwide.
I agree with that. As an attorney, prior to being a judge, have you been to certain schools or high schools to give presentation to talk to youngsters for them to know that can have an opportunity such as you have had?
Absolutely, because I think it's important, especially for children from disadvantaged backgrounds, to see somebody who looks like them be able to achieve certain things. So, for instance, if you come from a family, let's say you come from a Latino family where nobody in your family has been a doctor, but then you have somebody go to your school who is, let's say, Latino, a woman, who came from a socially economic disadvantaged background, and they explain to you that they achieved your dream. I think it motivates you to achieve your dream. So I think that it is very important for young children to see people who are similar to them who've been able to achieve their dreams. And I think it's also important for those of us who have achieved our dreams to give back to society.
I think the key component is to give back to society. Based on those powerful words, we have run out of time. I want to take the opportunity on behalf of the family of the Grapevine to tell you thank you so much for giving us the opportunity to share the information that you have shared with our audience. And I want to say to you also, continued success. You have gotten very far, and I'm sure there are more doors that you're going to knock down because you have the ability, you have the strength, you have the know how, and you have it going on, young lady. Thank you so much for being our special guest. And we hope to have you back soon on the Grapevine again.
Thank you very much for having me, and God bless you. And may you continue your great work in bringing these very important topics to society.
I thank you for your kind words. And again, this is Wallingford Lee saying good night for the International Grapevine and hope to see you next week at the same time and at the same place. Thank you for watching our program. Good night.